in the United States, how much worse would the job situation and the unemployment situation be if US corporations were not allowed to take on trillions of dollars of debt that can never be paid back, putting these companies in the category of zombie companies? Hey everybody, JJ here. You're watching Bull, Boom, Bear Bust. It's March 13th. It's Saturday. Hope everybody is doing well so far this weekend. Well, you might have heard it from many economists, but there's bubbles everywhere. The housing market, the stock market, the bond market, debt in general, there are bubbles, including US companies. How many companies would fail if it were not for the availability of all this debt given out by the money printers? And how many more tens of millions of people would we see in the unemployment line if these companies actually had to produce enough income to handle this debt? No one knows. Well, let's take a look at some of these staggering numbers today. According to recent data out of the Fed, U.S. companies now face the highest levels of debt on record. Let me say that again, the highest levels of debt on record. But yet very few people are worried about a financial crisis, even though we've already went through a financial crisis before that resulted from too much debt back in 2008. I've never seen so much false confidence in a debt-based economic system. The corporate debt market, where companies go to borrow cash, and for over a decade, super low interest rates from 2008 financial crisis have made borrowing easier and easier, since U.S. companies have regularly offered up bonds for sale, taking advantage of this cheap access to cash. And it's now estimated that 20% of the largest public firms are now zombie corporations due to the levels of debt. And this horde of zombie companies, firms that cannot survive on their own without constant infusions of credit, has grown to the point where 1 in 5 companies would not be in operation right now without this endless debt machine. And Bloomberg noted that these zombie companies have gorged on $1 trillion just since the onset of the virus shutdowns. And imagine how much better off so many American people would be if this debt, instead of being given out to corporations, was given out to the people. I'm not saying that's the solution, but if endless amounts of currency are going to be created out of thin air and handed out, I would rather see it go to the people rather than the corporations. Now, of course, the argument that they're going to make is they're going to say, well, it's the corporations that give people jobs. Well, why are so many people needing jobs? Because there's so much debt, the high cost of living makes it very difficult for one to be self-employed, especially when you look at the high cost of healthcare. So people are desperate for employer-based healthcare plans. Now, how much longer this debt insanity can last? Well, it's anyone's guess. Now, one of the most common questions that I see down in comments and that I get asked directly in various platforms is, JJ, what can we do? We know the banking system is completely crazy, crooked. We know that it's destined to fail. We know that things are likely only going to get worse. Well, what can we do to prepare? Well, if you tune into every episode, we've talked about this quite frequently. Here's what I do, and I'm not saying this is what you should do, because everyone's financial situation is different, right? There's people out there with no savings. There's people with a lot of savings just sitting in a banking account or checking account somewhere, just basically getting devalued because they're not invested. So I've said this before, I try to stay balanced. I try to have some cash. I try to also have investments. And luckily, I've had some pretty decent investments over the past year, especially when you look at the surge in some of these digital assets. I also continue to accumulate assets that I think are going to go up in the future once this whole debt Ponzi scheme implodes. And what do I think that's going to be? I think that's going to be silver. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next few months, but ultimately, I think we're going to have to go back to real money. What makes this different now currently is more people are aware. Remember, even in the financial crisis, we didn't have this many people alert to how this economy is actually being run with the endless debt. People didn't know back then. Yes, we had the internet, but it wasn't out there in the public eye as much as it is now with the resources that we have now to communicate with each other, such as the resource that you're listening to me on today. So yes, have metals, have digital assets, have physical assets. Real estate is good. Right now, I wouldn't be buying in California, but that's California. There's other places where homes are still very, very affordable. And I think more country-like settings are going to be the big go-to places. We've already seen a big exodus from the cities. And I think after the decline finally comes into full swing, in the country where you can be more self-sufficient is going to be the place to be. Land where you can grow food. All right, so just take a step back and think of how insane this economy is right now. So we have to send out stimulus checks because there's so many job losses and the cost of living is so high that most people cannot make it without these handouts. But yet they keep the bubbles inflated and they don't allow prices to come down. How insane is that, right? So the high cost of living and not enough income is the problem. The bubbles keep getting bigger. Now, speaking of stimulus checks and how desperate people are for these $1,400 payouts, let's go over to Twitter real quick here and just see a few tweets that mentioned stimulus that I thought were pretty interesting. Right here out of @Leslie. She says, me constantly checking my direct deposit for that stimulus check. And you look at the dogs right here. And this kind of reminds me of when you're sitting at a light or at an intersection and you have someone standing on the corner asking for a donation or someone that's begging and they're staring at you and you're sitting in your car and you're looking straight ahead and you're trying not to look at them. And yes, I do. I give them $1 every now and then. I look over and roll down the window. Here's another one. @LibertyAndrews says in her tweet the following, quote, the funniest thing about the stimulus checks is that they're acting as though $1,400 is enough to recover the damage done to families when the government forced them out of work, unquote. Very well said. Dan Price Dan Price Seattle says, quote, billionaires have almost a third of America's wealth. If you've got a $1,400 stimulus check every day and never spent it, you would have $1 billion in the year 3978. But the billionaires pay a lower tax rate than the people getting the stimulus checks. Make it make sense. End of tweet. Now, who is Dan Price? I had seen his tweets come up quite a lot. So I went over to his profile. He is a CEO that cut his pay by $1 million so all of his workers could make $70,000 per year. He's also written books. Right? Imagine if every CEO was like Dan Price. You might actually see an economy that wasn't destined to implode. All right, also back on stimulus checks, @JohnLAF13 says the following, quote, anyone wondering why JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo are holding stimulus checks until March 17th? Look no further than this. Each bank makes around $5 million per day on overdraft fees. I would have to fact check that one. That sounds like a lot of overdraft fees per day. That adds up to big bank profits. JP Morgan Chase made close to $2 billion from overdraft charges last year. Wells Fargo made $1.8 billion. Bank of America $1.7 billion in overdraft fees. And it looks to be correct. Look at this. Banks will collect more than $30 billion in overdraft fees this year. And that's just a recent article that came out a few months ago. $30 billion in a year. That's absolutely insane. Banks love it when people are broke. They make more money. Isn't that interesting how it works? Thanks everybody for watching. Hope everybody's doing well. Continue to prepare. Thanks for being here, for supporting this channel. The best thing you can do is subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can come back for more updates if you'd like to support this channel, if you'd like the information. Thank you very much again, everybody. Stay well, stay safe, stay prepared. Bye for now. Peace.